by the recommendation and take into account the risk to themselves and to their families. And
Joey Clark.
Welcome back to News and Views. In the afternoon, I'm your host, Joey Clark. Now, as promised, we have old friend of mine, Jeffrey Tucker, though he's looking young these days. Hey, Jeffrey, how you doing?
Fine. Good to see you, Joey.
Good to see you. So I wanted to open with that clip because there's Dr. Fauci again on the TV. What do you make of this comeback of, the COVID talk, new variants, new lockdowns? What's going on here?
They're clearly trying to warm us up for something and testing public opinion. This is a critical thing. They want to know the extent to which people are going to put up with it or not. And I don't really have the answer to that either. I'm not sure, what the we can talk about this more because it really does matter. I mean, do you think that if we have lockdowns, people are going to comply with it or not? My own personal estimate is that 20% will not, but that 80%, will, sort of go along with it. But that may be wrong. So I think that's what's going on here. They're trying to test the public. And the reason why Fauci went on that interview with CNN is because he figures there's a trusted news source, right?
Right.
They're always very nice to him. And he's been careful for 3.5 years not to go on any hostile interviews so he doesn't get asked any questions about, lockdowns and gain of function research. He hates that. He hates being questioned by hostile interviewers. So he went on CNN and Smirkanish, I guess his name is, it wasn't trying to trap him or trick him. He was actually legitimately seeking an answer because he figured that Fauci had it. I mean, he cited a study that, it's a meta-analysis that collects all the randomized trials against masks and concludes that these masks are ridiculous and don't work. He presented that in great detail to Fauci in hopes that Fauci would generate an obvious answer. The Michigan study this, or the Calgary study that, or the UK study this. But Fauci did not do that. He said, well, it's true that masks don't work on a population level, but they do work on an individual level. Okay, that's that's a weird thing to say.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, in the whole, but it works in all the particulars. Wait, I mean, is there some relationship between whether it works for individuals and whether it works for the whole of society or not? I mean, it was a very strange comment. Smirkanish was taken aback by that and just kept leaning in further and further. Eventually, Fauci just has this meltdown, this public meltdown for the entire world. It may be the very first one that really exposed what a witch doctor he really is, and what a lying pseudoscientist he really is. And Smirkanish is himself a little bit mortified by this,
Well, yeah, oh, absolutely. And Fauci's been all over the place on this. I can remember when masks didn't work. We need them for the professionals. Then actually masks work, and it's not for you. You're protecting your neighbor. And actually better than one mask, 2 masks. We got to go with 2. Eventually, we'll have an event horizon, infinite mask on our faces. Yeah. But I mean, and so now, maybe then we're seeing a breakdown of this kind of the sexiest doctor alive, the guy that they put Christmas ornaments up on the tree.
Well, I took some time and listened to Smirkanish's own post Fauci podcast on the whole subject. And he, once again reiterated, and in fact, he sent an apology. Get this, he sends an apology to Fauci and said, "Oh gosh, I didn't really mean to, do this sort of gotcha interview. That was not my purpose. I was really just looking for you to give the scientific answer. My apologies. I hope you're not mad at me." And Smirkanish says, well, he doesn't feel at liberty to report what Fauci texted him back. I'm like, why not? You're a reporter. Report what he texted back. What the hell? I mean, if I texted Smirkanish something, I'm sure he would put it all over the screen. Why doesn't he do that for Fauci? He's still protecting Fauci. But he had a very interesting observation, Joey, that I think you'll enjoy. He said that he's been asking the same question you and I are asking. Is what is the level of civilizational tolerance, population-wide tolerance for these kind of lockdowns? And he says based on his audience, and his audience is, not your audience, not my audience. His audience is, the CNN, crowd, whatever the hell that is, however many that is. And he said among those people, he thinks that 25% are dedicated dogmatically against lockdowns. But he said, here's the critical thing: they're so much more passionate than everybody else. That the lockdown people are uncertain, they don't care that much, they're a little confused, they're a little squishy, and they're just not able to muster the energy. He said, but these anti-lockdown people are passionate, they're knowledgeable, they know the science, they've done their reading, they've been challenged now for 3.5 years, they're very sophisticated on the science. He said, and he said, so it doesn't take a majority to resist the next lockdowns. All it takes is a dedicated, super informed, and tremendously passionate minority. Those are the people that are going to rule the day. And that's a good reminder for me. It's a good reminder for all of us. Actually, that's what rules the world.
Well, that gives me some hope because, the origins of this lockdown idea, right, it's like a student science project or something?
Yeah, from 2005. The idea has been around now for nearly 20 years that we would just outwit the microbial kingdom, by standing 6 feet away from each other or something. The whole thing is just, that the virus is going to get really scared because, I graduated from Harvard or something.
Right.
So this idea has been around a very long time, and it wasn't invented by medical scientists. It was invented by computer scientists. People who've never been in a clinic, they've never cured a disease, they don't know anything about therapeutics, they don't know anything about viruses, they never read a book on the subject. And the guy who came up with the idea of social distancing is purely a computer modeler. That's all he is. And he had a Cooties-style model of infectious disease that we learned in 3rd grade, where, some guy starts a rumor that the girls have cooties and you have to stay away from them. That's as sophisticated as his understanding was, and this idea languished for 15 years without really going anywhere, except that Bill Gates got behind it and started funding all the epidemiological journals and all the public health centers and the universities, and they gradually grew more and more and more because these people just say whatever. Academia. These guys, they're not exactly like the height of bravery here. So eventually the lockdown school of thought took over, and they tried to do it in 2009, but everybody's bored with it because, hey, we got a financial crisis, leave me alone. And 2020 seemed like a good chance to deploy it because they wanted to create a lot of chaos. The other thing, because of who. The other thing that's really fascinating about this, just this morning, a new memo came out that we'd never seen before from a FOIA request. And it's from January 27th. And this is, this was David Marans, who's Fauci's co-author, who co-authored the article with Fauci, in which he said we need a new infrastructure of human existence in which we don't go to baseball games or have pets. We don't live in cities. We all just stay apart from each other, and they'll protect us from all infectious disease forever and ever. That came out in August of 2020. So that's the co-author of that article. So he writes Fauci. And he says, hey, Dr. Fauci, I got some bad news from Wuhan. This EcoHealth Alliance, they're one of the main beneficiaries of NIH funding. They were the guys that were working with the Wuhan lab, and very likely this is a lab leak. And then the same guy goes on to say, and from this virus, they tried various kinds of vaccines. They were not able to find any vaccine that works against it.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that was admitted behind. It's just now come out. Wow.
Just this morning. That was January 27th. That was the day that Fauci and Farrar of the Wellcome Trust in the UK went to burner phones and highly secure communications and said, what are we going to do? We're going to be blamed for World War III, starting World War III. Everybody's going to figure out that we've been giving grants to the Wuhan lab. They've leaked a virus that's now coming to the U.S. We've got to have a game plan. So their first thought was deny, deny, deny. So by February 4th, they came out with this fancy pants paper called The Proximal Origins of the SARS-CoV-2. They said it's not a lab leak. It came from a wet market. Those weird Chinese, they eat weird raw food. That's probably what gave it.
It was a pangolin. Yeah, right.
Yeah, all right. That's their line. They stuck to it throughout the whole of February, even though on the inside they knew for sure that it was elaborate, and that it was funded by U.S. taxpayers, very likely.
If that's not a smoking gun, I don't know what is. That's huge, huge breaking news.
And Joey, the thing that's really troubled me all along for 3.5 years, I've never figured this out. Fauci was never a lockdown guy. He's, for all of his problems, he's an infectious disease doctor. He understands viruses. He knows you can't just like socially distance. He knows masks don't work. He knows that lockdowns don't work to stop the spread of a virus. Why did he come around to favoring the lockdown position, say February 26th or something like that? Why did this happen? And there's never been a good answer to that. The best answer I think we can come up with, in light of this memo that came out this morning, is that it was all an elaborate attempt at subterfuge. It was just the whole last 3.5 years of hell was Fauci trying to cover up his fingerprints over the EcoHealth Alliance funding of the lab leak. That's what it was all about. That's my best explanation at this point.
Again, folks, we're talking to Jeffrey Tucker. He's the president of the Brownstone Institute and a daily columnist at the Epoch or some Epoch Times. Yeah. And a quick follow-up here on just that subject. I had the opportunity to actually in person sit and talk to James Lindsay for a little while, and he was more focused on, say, the social science side of things, and I saw this early in college, but I asked him, is peer review just completely foobar? And he agreed. From you looking over these last few years in particular at the medical science and all these journals, not to mention like your background in economics, and how that can be so politicized. Like, do we have any hope for these institutions and the process to be objective?
So I wrote about that this weekend, and I'll put it to you this way, Joey. When all my infectious disease doctor friends and public health friends were apoplectic for years about that. I mean, all during 2020, they're screaming, they're lying to us. The MMWR, which is the weekly, a fortnightly report from the CDC on the science, but is full of bullshit. They couldn't believe it. When they were talking to me about this, and really with a great deal of emotion and horror, I couldn't really get it. Because if you had asked me in 2019, is the CDC corrupt? I would have said, yeah, probably, right? I was like, it's not my field. Are the medical journals lying to you? I would have said, yeah, probably. But it is their field. And they trusted that the system worked. The reason they got so emotional and so passionate about this and so demoralized was to see their own profession completely fall into corruption and lies, okay? Now, something very similar happened to me this last week with the Bureau of Labor Statistics concerning their new jobs reports. They said that there had been no change or little change in the number of part-time jobs coming up. That's what their press release said. And I was like, that's interesting. Where did all these new jobs come from, if not from part-time jobs? I looked it up. 4 million part-time jobs for economic reasons went from 4 million to 4.21. Okay, so 210,000 new part-time jobs for people who don't want them. They'd rather have full-time jobs instead they have part-time jobs. That means we're converting full-time jobs to part-time jobs at a vast level in this country. Okay, that is what the data show. That is not what the BLS said in their press release that was dutifully reported in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. So I started going crazy. I mean, right. The BLS is lying to us about economics. The jobs data is right there. Anybody can look at it. This is not a good sign. This is a disaster. People are losing full-time work and going to part-time work, and they're calling it good news, and then lying about it, And I called up my friend Jay Bhattacharya, and I said, "What? Everything is corrupt now. Even the BLS is reporting lies." And he goes, "Now you know how I felt when the CDC started lying." And
right.
He said, "When it's your own profession and your own concern, you get really rattled by it." So the only question we have, but you're asking, I'm asking, everybody's asking, is how deep does the corruption run?
And that's where my mind goes. I wrote a op-ed myself about that. I actually figured maybe it's me projecting my own journey, but I think when you see the fall in trust in, say, religion and God in the country, however you want to define that, whatever religion, you're seeing a correlation of trust in all institutions, in particular government, but all institutions. And it makes me wonder even the Constitution itself, I just told Judge Knapp this, that it's like they killed it a decade or heck 60 years ago, and they're now wearing around like a skin suit like they're Hannibal Lecter. So if you look across the board and there's no trust, how do we get out of this?
One really does wonder about this. You know, on the religion point in particular, it's true. I mean, the religions all caved to lockdowns. They locked you out of your church on Easter Sunday 2020, and then repeated the same thing again on Christmas that same year. And then some churches were doing the same thing a year later. Just come to our worship service on Zoom, or some had vaccine mandates. Okay, those churches are in a state of meltdown. However, there are many religions in this country and sectarian institutions that never locked down. They put God ahead of government, and they kept their services open. I know one priest friend of mine in Grand Rapids, Michigan, let everybody in the back door, you know, for Easter and Christmas, because he didn't want the media, you know, taking pictures and becoming a scandal and being reported to the health authorities. So he let in all of his parishioners through the back entrance. This happened in the United States of America. Those institutions are thriving. So here, I think, is the way to build trust, right? It's through courage in the face of intimidation. And the institutions that can do that are going to survive. Those institutions that keep being acquiescent to political priorities over their mission, they're the ones that are going to fall into a continuing state of discredit.
Yeah, and maybe truth and reconciliation, though that's often been a line of the left or Gorbachev. But truth, I think, would tear this government down, but in a good way. You build up new trust in people and new institutions and bring a wrecking ball for the old ones.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, that may speak to the reason why we've seen so few apologies here, you know? Right. Maybe they're just afraid that if they say, yeah, that was wrong, keep schools closed that long. That was a mistake. The masks really didn't work. Okay, we kind of exaggerated the vaccine. You know, if they said these kind of things, they're worried that the entire edifice will just crumble, you know, and they're terrified of that. So they have to keep pretending as if it was well intended, it wasn't perfect, but we are following the science as we know it, and all this gibberish, you know.
Well, and then you see Joe Biden saying, "Get the new vaccine, folks."
The proof of the pudding's in the eating.
And now you see the first lady is got COVID again. It's just.
Why are we doing this 3.5 years later? It's headline news that First Lady has a cold. I mean, what are we doing? It's unbelievable. It's like we never get out of this trap. But I tell you what, in about 45 days, we're going to know something about how much the public believes about these vaccines. What are your expectations for the uptake of the new COVID vaccine that was incidentally never tested? What do you think? Even folks who got a lot of the booster stuff are saying no to this one that I know.
I think people are going to reject it or not even notice it's out.
Less than 20%?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where we're going. And that's a good thing. People are waking up. I think people would buy it. I was scared as anybody else at the beginning of this thing. Yeah. But now, 3 years later, we should be the wiser. And I think that's my hope, at least. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I'm intrigued at how much Pfizer and Moderna are spending on advertising for this vaccine. I don't know if you watch the U.S. Open, but you know, about every 10 minutes, there's another ad for the Moderna thing. They don't sell it as an ad. They just say, "Oh, if you get COVID, you're going to the hospital, you're going to die. You know, that's why protect yourself with this vaccine," because nobody has time for the 19. That's what they say. And then about the third time this ad came on, I thought, who's putting out this ad anyway? Is that CDC? It's not entirely clear. So I glued myself to the television and just like stared at it, the last frame, in tiny print at the bottom, Moderna. Son of a bitch.
No, well, I appreciate your time as always, Jeffrey. I'm out of it, but if folks want to check out what you're doing, writing, talking about, how can they do so?
Oh, nonstop reporting on this stuff at Brownstone as well. No, I can't stop. I'm just obsessed with it. You know, when something destroys civilization as we know it, you know, you want to figure out what happened and why. That's all we do. So go to brownstone.org.
Well, I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. I'm enjoying doing this again.
Thanks so much,
sir.